Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this second TelcoSec Talk. This is quite a unique one as per a very unique situation. So thank you very much for everyone joining. We are already seeing quite a lot of people. I am joined by Hamid Kashfi and Philippe Langlois. How are you guys?
Awesome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. The topic is definitely a complex one, and this needs to have a deep quantitative and qualitative eye, which I think we have the best people to do this for. Let's wait a minute or two to see how many to see the people joining, and ensuring there is always the couple of minutes delay. We all know about the dentist curse. You start late and all your meetings are delayed by the few minutes. But for everyone joining, thank you. We are seeing people from all around the world, even in time zone where it may be super early or super late. So this is exciting. I will push the topic for today. Decoding the Iran cyber attacks and APT landscape, victims and attackers. As I mentioned, it's the second talk about TelcoSec, but we are going to go above and beyond telco today, thanks to Hamid deep expertise. As Philippe says on the chat, please ask any chat. So I will be the moderator. The platform allows to have different questions. I will try to share those questions with our presenters during and after this presentation. So please engage, share, discuss the topics that are interesting to you and to the companies you are representing, companies and institutions you are representing, and we will try to address everything. So I guess we can start. The agenda quickly is going to be introducing, obviously, our great speakers because I've been only talking, then introducing a platform that we will be using to discuss the topic that will be a great support for this, and that will be a great support around the action and timeline analysis from 2007 to 2026 about the Iran cyber wars and APTs, and then there will be conclusion and the obvious Q&A. So introduction, I am joined by Hamid Kashfi, who is one of the, I would say, most recognized figure in cybersecurity, particularly in the Iran context. So thank you very much. He's based out of Sweden, and thank you very much for being here, Hamid. If you want to maybe introduce yourself quickly before I move on to Philippe.
Hi, I just want to say hello to everyone. Thank you for joining the talk, and thank you guys for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to put faces to names with P1 guys, because I've been a fan as well and following your awesome research and work past couple of years. So great opportunity to catch up. Yeah, and pleased to be here for the talk.
Thank you very much, Hamid. And Philippe, whom a lot of you have already heard about the different research we've done, is the founder and CEO of P1 Security. It's going to be 15 years, Philippe, this year. And so yes, he's a security researcher and entrepreneur for a few years. I won't go into too much details.
Thank you very much, Pierre.
So thank you for being both here. After that light mood, we're going to go into a more heavy mood. Again, do ask any questions that you may have. Any context is valuable, so please share also the context that you want to address with our experts. And I think, Philippe, I will leave the rest to you, talking about Iran APTs.
Perfect. Thank you, Pierre. Yeah, definitely. So the goal here is really to understand both sides of the story in cyber conflict in this context of this US-Israel-Iran war. And of course, here it's important from our professional perspective to give a view on what happened, what we know, what actually really happened, but also to give a context on the background of all stakeholders. And our goal is always to stay analytical and basically, so I refrain from having a political perspective on it and focus rather on the geopolitics and cyber security aspect of it. As you know, there's many things that targeted Iran and many things that were originating from Iran, and that's why basically we invited Hamid here on this discussion. And before we jump to the platform side that we'll be using, Hamid, you want to have a quick word on these basically cyber actors?
Yeah, so what I can add is there is an interesting gap in the coverage of updates or news or incidents when it comes to Middle East, because majority of the media or CTI shops or journalists focus on attacks that are originating from Iran, which is of course interesting and a priority. And then there's a little bit of problem with that, which I think it's less spoken of. We can later on dig through it in the next sections of the slide, which would be the actual capabilities of the Iranian actors versus what's being presented and hyped up about them. And then there is this other gap. It's closing, but it's still there, covering what targets and goes towards Iran, because that's also something that must be watched. Of course, some nations cannot do friendly fire and cover all the details. That's understandable, especially during the wartime. But if, as you mentioned, we're going to have an unbiased and pure technical understanding and discussion about what's going on in these regions, you need to look at both sides, not just one attacking the other, because they are also, in some cases, especially directly connected and continuation of each other. It's not an isolated attack. It's not an isolated APT group that's focused on the region. From Iran, most often than not, you see one attack from each side being a continuation or response to attack from the other side. And that even goes deep into the technical side. So we could go back to cases from early 2010s and look at Shamoon attack and others. Later on, we'll probably talk about it. The deployed malwares and nature of the attacks are literally subverted a version of what one has received and slinging it back to the adversary that attacked them using the same approach, same methods, basically just repurposed malware that they received. They sling it back to the targets, which has been observed a couple of times past few years. So I think these gaps are something that are on top level, they could be technical, but you could also look at it from non-technical aspect, because it tells a lot about each side and how this is evolving and developing over the years. And not all of it is zeros and ones and IOCs and technical details. Part of them are doctrines of different countries, but doing cyber attacks, how they are responding to each other, how it has escalated and got more complicated, and considering the geopolitical situation in the region as well. It's a lot of moving targets and a lot of different factors and parameters that combine to each other and becomes the cyber war, I think, that everyone talks about, but has been talking about. But now this is really happening, and we can study it up close, and hopefully with systems like this, Apex, that you have provided, make it a little bit more accessible and reachable for less technical people as well, to be able to track and grasp it and get a grip on what's going on, who is who, what is what, how events are connected, what's their timeline and stuff. That's something I struggle with most of the times myself. Yeah. So I think it's good to have some tool available to general audience of these updates, that they can visually track stuff and group things and cluster things and study them, rather than reading 200 APT CTI reports and not understanding half of it. And then by the time you finish the report, you have already forgot half of the details from page 1 or 2 of the report. So that I hope this will help some of the users that have those kind of problems as well.
Well, let's jump right into it. And as you were saying, the goal of using basically this tool is really to connect weak signals that are interesting and to know when to focus on the relationship between actors, between events. So here the goal here is really to use this tool we use internally as a visualization tool. So today will be mostly OSINT driven, meaning that the information we are going to present here is mostly public. And we always have a telecom focus from P1 security perspective. But what's very interesting here with Hamid is he has basically this much more broad and in-depth knowledge about the region, and especially about Iran, which is awesome because then we can use this canvas linked to, of course, the current events in order to enable to understand all the different trajectories, the different arcs. For example, you are talking about the evolution of capabilities, which are related to the training of cyber attackers. And also not only in Iran, but the evolution of cyber attacks organization. For example, we'll be talking about the equation group within TAO, which is Tailored Access Organization, a part of NSA in the US. So we'll definitely, and having a simple system to visualize both relationship and timeline is crucial. So that's actually what we are going to do. We are going to start this discovery through basically past events, the deep history, and then build on this in order to see how we got there, what were early on the main focus. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And normally this should be visible to you. So what we have here is basically a graph representation of relationship between actors, and at the same time, a timeline representation. So definitely don't hesitate here to basically ask question details, because we can each time deep dive between an actor, here I centered it on Iran, and what happened with basically this actor in the news, date related, so we can actually go into the detail because every single event is sourced here from OSINT data, so the data set is public, so we can actually click on the relevant information. And to start in a very progressive way, when you are usually confronted with any kind of situation, be it forensic, be it any kind of security situation, you have a superposition of many layers of information. And this represents a very complex graph. So here, the goal of having a timeline, and I'm going to just type T and start with a very simple representation, is that at the beginning of the timeline, here we are in 2002. Basically, it's very simple. We see basically here the basic event is that basically there's a Natanz nuclear facility where people are suspecting that there's nuclear enrichment that is happening. And this is really the beginning of a deep focus of a Western basically organization to start to see what is really happening in Iran. And this is one layer, the geopolitics, is their proliferation in Iran. But at the same time, we see organizations which later are going to be definitely linked to cyber attacks, also using that layer, that cyber security or cyber attack layer, for their geopolitic related hacks, but also things related to their own people in Iran, also things related to the diaspora. So the goal here is to start explaining not only the relationship, but these different layers that superpose and that make this complex reality. So what can we say? I mean, here basically we know there's Natanz, then there's basically MOIS, which is the Ministry of Intelligence and Security in Iran, which is one of the two big components of the cyber attack side in Iran. The other one being IRGC. And then once positioned, we kind of see that there's both a superposition of the internal focusing of things, where basically Iran has first to focus on its internal Iranian citizens. And as you were saying, this is very early on. It's only later, because here we're only in 2008, that actually the focus toward hackers and to recruit them in order to leverage their Iranian hackers to leverage their knowledge for MOIS and IRGC started to happen, as I understand.
Yeah.
When was your first knowledge that actually there was a focus that actually IRGC and MOIS were starting to say, hey, we have internal Iranian hackers, they can be a resource, we could leverage them for operations?
I mean, right now, I think what we are looking at is like the data set that you have fed to the system, and it's definitely not a picture of, or full detail of everything. Of course, there are like a lot more data sets and data points out there as well. But if we want to go back to the time, we can start actually around as early as 2000, 2001. There has been already structures in place, organizational structures in place, groups in action, not as mature and as well planned as what we are seeing right now, of course. But it goes way beyond or before 2007, of course. And 2000, I think, 2007 was a period of time which actually the government in Iran started on the wrong foot to get engaged with the security community and hacker space in Iran. And as that's their typical practice of everything, they try to use force and like threatening approach to recruit people, to organize things, to suppress spread of information and whatnot. And it's a subject that I think talked about before openly in like other events, that it backlashed and it backfired in a sense that it steered the security community in Iran off its normal progress and advancement rail. And that like that costed for them as well to not be able to progress well and not to be able to advance well. Of course, over the years they tried to fix it. As you will probably slide it more to the right, you would see that things get more advanced, that things get more technical. We see more structured and more organized training methods, and then after a couple of years we start to observe fruits of those trainings, which emerge as like basic tooling, basic implants, basic web shells and whatnot. And as the training continues and more like entities and more groups start to train hackers for the government, for MOIS, for IRGC, or the internal knowledge transfer proceeds and goes on, you see that also reflects back and blossoms as more advanced tools, more advanced attack techniques. And it's interesting to watch it over a span of like 10, 15, 20 years. You can actually see the progress, and you can see how things have spread around and into smaller subgroups, into smaller actor groups. And it's like similar to Iran. North Korea has been also studied in a kind of similar context and way, that everyone has been kind of studying them as an unserious threat. And like technical people tell that they are not serious. Of course, they are not technically or advanced or capable. But the sales team of different companies and some CTI shops and products, of course, they have to upsell them. And you cannot sell a multi-million-dollar product for a threat actor that's just doing phishing. You have to make it look more presentable, so your product and your security services are perceived and sold better. And that's another thing that's less talked about, but I mean, we'll get there. But the point is, they started as rudimentary techniques and tools, and they evolved as well. So did all of us. I mean, none of us are born like experts. We learn over the time, and so do attackers, and so do threat actors, so does MOIS, so does IRGC. But the trajectory of improvement has been different and has had up and down the past like 10, 15 years. And if you go in parallel at the beginning, like North Korea and Iran both were like not really major threats, I would say, in technical sense. But if we look at the North Korea right now, they are doing like pulling off some advanced operations, like with all of these crypto hastes, and like they're seriously advanced works as well, technically, and like in terms of like implementation of the attacks and planning. I'm no North Korea, nor am I watching it closely, so I would defer to someone else that knows more. But if we go back to Iran, we would watch more or less the same pattern, except with much slower rate. And there has been a big gap in this advancement and progress, which is closing now, because as I mentioned, at the earliest 2006, 2007, the government started recruiting and steering the hacker community in a wrong way that actually created a gap and suffocated the research community and suffocated the hacker space, which costed them lack of resources well a couple of years. And you could see that for many years they were struggling and using and repurposing very basic tools. They were basically relying on public exploits, publicly disclosed vulnerabilities, and tooling and repurposing open source and commercial tooling, until their internal training finally kicked in and started to produce actual results, which would be operators, hackers, and threat actors and whatnot. And they did a lot of investment as well over the years, funded a lot of front companies that are practically off-site hacking groups for governments. I think every country does that more or less one way or another. So
from around, not necessarily located, by the way, in Iran, but located within the Gulf or around.
Mostly at the early years, it was mostly inside Iran, I would say, or as far as I know. And they were not as invested, I would say, at the early years to have off-country teams or operations. They were not that big as well. So it wouldn't make sense, I presume. And most of what we have been watching at those years are front companies and some internal teams, of course, getting engaged with, and some contractors working with the government or for the government and delivering stuff. And it's been kind of like early years of Iranian threat actors groups, individual ones, is in a way similar to what's happening in China right now, that the government has established that it's okay to work for the government, or a lot of individuals and independent people are running the operations for contractor companies that are under the umbrella of the government or directly for the government. So a lot of it is being outsourced to the private sector. Iran also started the same way and is still continuing it, except that in past, like I would say 10 years, they invested a lot more in front companies and internal teams and internal groups, which as we will probably see later on as we slide more, we'll see more of them popping up. And beside that, there has been also a decent amount of collaboration between MOIS and IRGC. We look at them as different entities, which they are, but there has been a lot of sharing of information, capabilities across these two organizations and across the teams. There is, of course, some rivalry going on all the time that they mock each other and they try to step over each other's boundaries, but that's not really our focus here. And what we should focus is that you shouldn't look at them as two isolated entities in a way that we look at two different APT groups across countries. If one Iranian APT pulls off something, we can. It's safe to assume that some part of the information, some part of the knowledge, and some part of the skill eventually will overlap and sprinkle over the rest of the actors and groups as well. And we can go by examples later on as well. We can see it actually by example that one group starts working on, for example, industrial systems and SCADA systems, and then you see that it becomes a more popular trend across other groups as well. Like one group starts some novel way of pulling off phishing attacks that's more successful, and then you see that being used by a couple of other groups as well. So as you mentioned, like it's a lot of smaller things to look at, but to be able to understand it, you need to be able to zoom out and see and study them as a cluster, which I think what you're presenting here is just for that.
So can we say that basically the kind of build up in capabilities that happened where they basically Iran as a group, not only MOIS or IRGC, but as a group, basically they started to invest more into the training, into recruiting the hackers, into nurturing more than maybe coercion. Is it related to them being stung by Stuxnet basically in 2009 or before? Or is it something, two parallel streams that happened anyway? Was Stuxnet a wake-up call for them that they could receive attack? And then we saw that they repurposed quite a lot of stuff that they were receiving into actually attack tools they could use themselves. So do you think that was a wake-up call, or basically it's unrelated?
I would say parallel events, because as we talked, like things existed before and they were operating before as well, and so did on the western side as well. Like Stuxnet is not the biggest and first cyber attack in Iran as well. If you go look at, for example, Snowden leaks, for example, if you go back to some of the slides, you need to know what you're looking for, and then you could trace like IP addresses, domain names that are masked. But if you're familiar with entities, you can figure out and unmask them. It goes much before that as well. And like the Stuxnet itself, everyone starts looking at Stuxnet from the day it was discovered and happened. But in reality, just the development of it itself goes almost 2 years back, like compile time of. And then there is this funny like misperception of how it started, is that everyone thinks that Stuxnet managed to hit the targeted centrifuge cluster because Ahmadinejad, the past president of Iran, showed up on a TV stream and like walking around in computers, and then there was a screen of computer that shows the similar matching cluster, and everyone said, "Oh, this video probably tipped off the Westerns and they did it." But no, like the day that video was aired, I think the implant or the samples were already, I think, over 1 year in development, and like earliest samples available, compile time for them goes almost a year before that video. So that's irrelevant. Like, and it's also naive to assume that like some intelligence agencies in the West rely on national TV in Iran to broadcast and get ideas from.
You never know, but definitely the number of agents that were already implanted.
But back to your question, I would say these are parallel events. It was more of a wake-up call for everyone that how advanced and how sophisticated things can get. And then people actually started looking at more sophisticated stuff, and Duqu and Flame and the rest were also found as a result. But it was in a sense wake-up call for Iran as well, but not one that actually moved the needle, because of course some people, some organizations changed the way they run their security, changed the way they protect the systems. But as we have seen over the years, all the leaks, all the successful attacks, all the APTs and their samples that discovered in Iran or entities related to Iranians, all the public leaks by hacktivist groups that are targeting Iran past couple of years, you see that it hasn't really made any notable technical difference. Like attackers are doing what they want, they are leaking what they want, they have been running espionage operations in Iranian critical infrastructure and telecom networks for many years. And funny enough, even right now during this war, we are still seeing artifacts of those old operations, old prepositioning works right now being even as part of the war propaganda or capabilities. We see that Israel, for example, is telling that they have been using the hacked Iranian CCTVs or telecom networks to track and identify targets. So we have been talking about this openly for many years now. And if it would have meant to actually cause something or be an actual, because when we talk about wake-up call, it means you do something about it. Iran just woke up and looked around and went back to sleep, basically. So they did some stuff. I mean, we shouldn't just ignore everything. They did what they could, but it was not enough, and it's not on par with advanced capabilities of like Western nations and actor groups. And you cannot compare them either. Like I think the cyber capabilities budget of just one country in the West is equivalent of probably the entire army of Iran as well. I don't know the exact numbers, but I assume it's that kind of scale. And yeah, it's not comparable. And it was a wake-up call, but not one that made too much of a difference.
Yeah. So let's give a very quick roundup on Stuxnet for the people who are not familiar with the technical aspect of it. But basically, the few technical feats and really success of Stuxnet were, first, they breached the fact that it was an air-gapped facility using USB stick as a propagation basically vector. And then it was one of the first really well-publicized events or example of cyber physical joint operations, meaning that there was a cyber attack component, but there was also a physical, very palpable result, which was that they made the centrifuge, which are things used to enrich nuclear fuel, to basically go from uranium minerals that are extracted from Earth into actually usable uranium by using centrifuge, which basically are physical spinning devices, which enable to progressively refine the concentration toward more concentration of the uranium component of the mineral. And what was very interesting is that the way to destruct this centrifuge was to make them spin very fast, much faster than their limit, but at the same time, the Stuxnet hack or operation managed to display on the control of this industrial control system that actually the spinning speed was perfectly normal. So basically, that's the main biggest feat of this operation that actually successfully damaged quite a lot of centrifuge. I don't know if there's other notable things we want to say, but at that time that was quite surprising. Both Stuxnet and all the malware that enable Stuxnet to be successful were quite advanced.
Yeah, indeed. And some of the techniques and methods that used back then are still considered advanced by today's commercial implant providers or C2 providers, like more commonly used by red teams and stuff. You see that they are going back to implement similar capabilities and features. But yeah, for its time, it was definitely something way beyond its time, way ahead of its time. But it's also something that people keep forgetting, that what we are observing publicly and openly in reports, in exploits, in security research, in exploit development and whatnot, it's at least 5-6 years behind in what's actually happening in the commercial side of things, or as we call it, on the dark side of things, on the government level threat actors and state level actors. Things are way ahead of what you see openly and in public, and that has always been the case. The gap is now closing between the offense and defense, so they're getting closer and closer, but there is still a notable gap in terms of capabilities, features, and research done. So it all what we discover as result of works of state-sponsored groups always trickles down to commercial sector and to open source sector as well, and you can observe same capabilities being reproduced, reused by security community and also by other actors as well, being one of the examples by being Iranian groups as well. So you could start already from 2010, you would see that some capabilities of wipers that was used against Iran ends up being used by Iran against another country, for example. And it starts to flow and the wheel starts to spin, actually, this feedback loop of catching stuff, repurposing it, and reusing it against your adversary.
Yeah, I think this is really something we've seen a lot with Iran, in that they were on the receiving end of cyber attacks. They would then study how they got compromised, and then they would reuse the exact same attack, sometimes the exact same vulnerabilities, to actually trigger, basically to compromise some host in their own external target, which were very often basically Gulf-related infrastructure, other governments, government official even. But from our perspective, what we would see was more on the telecom side, critical infrastructures that would enable them to basically get to their targets. So very interesting, as you called it, the spinning wheel. Basically, this is really one of the key aspects. I think some other key aspect we've seen, there was a question in the chat. So there's the reuse of this attack. There's basically the fact that it's always a question which is not only cyber, but also related to kinetic and physical capabilities. So for example, the fact that there were some surveillance on handset, on mobile phone, both from Iran and from Western or Israel to target some people in Iran. There was also a focus on IoT and embedded devices. So it seems there's a bit of a signature where we say, oh, okay, we know they have this kind of modus operandi, their kind of focus, their kind of interest. Are there some other distinguishable facts or traits of basically this Iran-related cyber conflicts that that are to be added to this list?
I mean, there are plenty actually, and like IoTs was one example. We see that everyone thinks of hacking only as servers and computers and whatnot, but embedded devices has been a thing for many, many years, like goes back before 2000, and even hacking them. Like if you go way back in the early 2000s, right now we are seeing a simplified version of that with all these exploits being left and right found and released about like affecting VPN vendors. But if we study early 2000 times, there has been plenty of focus on Cisco routers and switches and vulnerabilities around them. And there were also, like, I remember 2001, there were already like botnets exploiting Cisco routers and switches, and you could exploit them. And there has been a focus on there as well, but not widely known and understood as an attack vector by the public, I would say. And the same way Iranians realized, like, they were targeted and they realized some of their systems were exploited and compromised, like back then, I think in early 2000. There were some cases, I'm not sure how good or how openly they are documented, but there were some cases that hardware and software implants were injected into supply chain of Iranian servers, modems, like ADSL modems and whatnot back then.
Back in 2000.
Yeah, in 2000, I think 6 or so, there was a case that there was a guy that was importing ADSL modems, like specifically US robotic modems, that they were already backdoored in the country, and they like MOIS eventually figured it out. They captured the guy and he was executed as well. But I know a bunch of other similar cases as well that are not openly discussed or not public. So that was hardly an isolated case. And then you see the effect of it, that Iranians, of course, realize that the embedded world is something interesting, and they go train on it. They hire people that have those skills, and then they learn that you see a series of blog posts, you see a spike on public research in the hacker community, and even in the training classes that you see pops up in Telegram groups, on like educational centers that teach cybersecurity skills and whatnot. You see that, oh, there's a special class now for hacking, for example, IoT or embedded devices. And then 1 year later, you see a new APT group pulling off an attack targeting some Israeli like embedded devices. Same applies to SCADA systems and industrial control systems that Iran became subject of it, Stuxnet being the like most known and better known example of that. But then again, it's not hardly an isolated case. There has been other similar cases all around the world. Then Iran realized, okay, this is an interesting and useful attack vector as well. Let's put some kids into learning this and repurposing it. And then we observe a bunch of proxy threat actor groups that are affiliated with Iran, focusing on Israeli networks, and left and right, you see they publish stuff. Most of them are like high noise, low impact hacks, of course. But nevertheless, you see the attack vector are SCADA systems, exposed cameras as well. Like similarly, CCTV cameras has been a thing for many years.
Oh yeah, we'll jump that for the context of the war. I'm going to forward basically the timeline, because to go to exactly what you are talking. So we see here we're still basically around the 2010, 2011 timeline, where we see these hacks, documentation about how they compromise Siemens PLC controller, basically for NATANs and other cyber physical activities. How Duqu was discovered. Duqu was discovered by a Hungarian lab, right? Crisis,
I think. Yeah. Don't ask me who or when.
When it showed up, I was super surprised. I was like, whoa, okay. I didn't even know too much about their advanced capability. So it was interesting. I always wondered if there was a geopolitical backside of it, because we've seen some tense relationship between Iran and what was basically Eastern countries which were impacted by their hacks. And I was really surprised. I was like, okay, they have a focus also on these kind of countries.
And then there is an interesting remark on that sector as well, like on the detection side and like on the forensics and incident response thing. Iran has been also improving on it and learning, and not to be surprised about, but the same way they learned from the exploits that they were on the receiving end. Sorry, it's a sneeze that got stuck. And the exploits and vulnerabilities and implants that they were on the receiving end of it, they were also watching the cyber threat intelligence companies in the West and in the Europe or in Eastern Europe, the way and the methods and the tools that they are using to do forensics and to do reversing and analyzing malwares and implants and whatnot. For many years, and still to a great length, Iranian side has been heavily relying on what's published on the Western side by the Western companies or East European companies or Russian companies. That was basically their oracle of learning what's going on in their network, which is ridiculous, because you are capable of finding only stuff that other people are telling you. So of course, if you are like Russian CTI company like Kaspersky, I mean, they are known to even report on Russian activities, of course, but it's naturally and expected to assume that they will not report on every ongoing operation that they discover for obvious reasons. Same goes for Europeans, same goes for Americans as well. So you're literally watching your adversary reporting what they are doing to you, and then go learn that and find what's being so it's like, oh hey, I'm hacking you, and here's like, by I mean this country, like I'm hacking Iranian networks, here are samples, here on some IOCs. There could be 10 more operations going on right now, but you don't see any public report, and they don't share those commercial or classified reports with the Iranians as well. Naturally, they would not know about it as well. But to your point about like crime or like this Eastern European crisis labs, Eastern European companies discovering these samples, it also started a parallel effort and parallel advancement and spinning wheel of Iranian CTI entities becoming a thing, becoming more capable and more investing. For many years, they were still heavily relying on the foreign aid and like expertise, but they eventually got a grip on it as well and started to run their own thing and do their own forensics as well. It's still not on par with like cutting edge and state of the art work that you see from Western CTI shops, but nevertheless it works, and they find stuff, not necessarily all of it. But I thought it's a good point and good time to stick it as well, that it not only advanced the offensive capabilities of Iran, it also advanced their defensive capabilities by watching what's being published about them being a target. So
yeah, exactly. And we must not forget that basically all CTI shops are kind of protecting the operations of the blocs they belong to. There's a very strong request from Western government to Western CTI shop, from Chinese government to Chinese, of course, CTI shops, etc., to Russians the same, to say, hey, we're doing an operation, we know you discovered this sample, please don't talk about it. And of course, this is a whole game of sovereignty and independence around this. So we kind of see this plays. For me, that was my analysis why basically this sample surfaced in Hungary and was talked about there. There's always a question when the operation is affecting other.
Yeah, like to get back and give a very short answer to your question. Most of the times when we see East European companies reporting and publishing on samples that are big in Iran, it's mostly because either Iranian companies or individuals seeked help or provided samples to them, or were active in their forum, support forums that, hey, this is a behavior like blue screen I'm observing on my computers, and they're in Iran. And then you sharpen your senses and of course go look for more. Or they have hired like experts from one of these companies and entities. They brought expertise into Iran to look at the samples, and they were basically contractor works that ended up work. Rarely it's actually a case that a live malware started spreading off Iran and that caused people to look at it and then get back to Iran. It's usually starting from Iran, either because someone provided sample to them or someone asked about like suspicious behavior that the company looked into it and got bigger. And obviously, in most cases, they are not allowed to, or they can't discuss who tipped them off for obvious reasons as well. But this is typically the way it works and it happens.
Okay. Interesting. So let's forward the timeline. So basically, we're in 2011 right now. We're 2011, 2012. One thing that was quite, I don't know once again if it was a wake-up call, but plenty of people in the West started to pay attention to Operation Cleaver. So basically, that was a lot of hacks that were actually, I don't remember which company, Silence, so which basically talked about this cyber operation. And it started also to show that there was some interest in not only countries within the Gulf, countries in US, Israel, etc., but also, for example, France was targeted. There were, during these acts, not only this Cleaver, there were plenty of telecom being hacked. We can't really know the final motives, but definitely in telecom and mobile, one big motive is to be able to survey people, individual, and to target them individually. So we started to see a lot of basically knowledge getting about what Iran was doing, but also when documenting, for example, Flame, to see that there were attacks conducted by Western intelligence organization toward Iran. Flame, to me, was significant and was not so spoken about, I would have said. So that's maybe part of the timeline, which was kind of surprising to me. Then we started to see operations which were not about intelligence, collecting information, but also wipers. And if we have a spectrum from intelligence that tries to stay completely covered, completely silent, and get information and be ready to strike if there was a need, if there's a need for some capability. The wipers are the exact opposite on the spectrum. And the Shamoon wiper, which destroyed 30,000 computers in Aramco, so basically big oil and gas in Saudi, was, I think, one of the biggest or earliest feat of APT 33, Elfin team. And that started to be basically on our radar. And to me, there's always this mix of what the news make, what is spun off and what is basically well publicized, and actually the importance, the deep cyber importance of some hacks or some operations, which are not too much spoken about, but which were quite massive. So it's always interesting to see the difference of treatment between these different actors.
Like Shamoon exactly is one of those cases that like everyone thinks, okay, Iran started these wiper attacks, but Shamoon is actually and literally a repurposed wiper that Iranians found and attacked. I think it was the NIOPDC or National Oil Company of Iran or another organization. I have it noted somewhere, but don't recall. Nevertheless, it was a style of attack or even similar code base that was discovered wiping stuff in Iran that Iran realized, and I think in a couple of months repurposed it and slinged it back at allies of the country that Iran believed the wiper they were targeted with was coming from. So Aramco was, of course, like an ally with the U.S., and they thought it's U.S. that deployed that wiper malware, and then they repurposed it and sent it back. And it was also a slight messaging as well that, okay, you do this to us, we will do it back at you as well. And this has been a cat and mouse and back and forth game since.
Yeah, and just after we saw basically some DDoS attack from basically, I don't remember exactly the name, but from Iran to the US. I was not familiar of hearing of attacks which were well publicized from Western to DDoS attack toward Iran, but I guess that must have happened. Then we see APT42, so basically Charming Kitten starting to appear with basically IRGC backing. APT39 with MOIS backing. So we still see clearly some APT imputed or attributed to be part of one or the other organization. Then there's basically cyber espionage. There's we start to end up in 2013 where a really well publicized case of telecom and mobile operator are being compromised and recognized are compromised and can be traced back due to artifact and IOCs to basically some of these APTs. Any of these were of significant basically focus for you where you say something is happening? It turned in 2015 where they started to ramp up in terms of capabilities.
I mean, if you look at it, looking at those individual groups and actors, like Kittens, you mentioned Charming Kittens, this is the one that was recently, their operation was basically exposed on a GitHub repository with the Kitten Buster. So that's a whole interesting set of things to look at and study. And comparing what they have been targeted with, at those years, they were still using very basic methods like phishing, reusing public exploits, reusing one-day vulnerabilities, and no really novel attacks. And one, I think, top-level observation that we could make from all of it is that typically most of the actual espionage-related operations are done by MOIS-affiliated groups, and what we see from IRGC affiliated groups are mostly destructive, mostly high noise propaganda oriented messaging and attempts and destructions. And they are also quite a lot of them are opportunistic. So rarely you see Iranian actor groups, especially on the IRGC side, that they gain access to somewhere, they lay low and they try to gather intelligence for long term. They usually gain access, do as much as damage as possible, and make it public as fast as possible with as much coverage that they can, coverage and traction in the media that they can generate. On the other hand, MOIS ones, they try to lay low, they try to gather information, stay as long as possible, maintain their access. And every now and then, depending on what's going on in the region and the geopolitical scene, they publish something from a couple of years prior or 1 or 2 years or a few months prior that demonstrates they have been actually there and persisting. And now they decided, not because they were caught, because they decided that they wanted to publish it. And a great example of that was Iranians, I think it was Moses' staff, that they demonstrated having access to Tel Aviv, I think, CCTV cameras. Like there was a company that was managing CCTV cameras in Tel Aviv. That was an old case that they combined kinetic attacks, which back then was a bombing attack against Tel Aviv. first demonstrated that they had access to these cameras. They published some photos and whatnot, got a media attraction out of it. But almost a year later on, using the same CCTV network that they outed themselves that they had access to, they published video of the camera that was pointed at that bus station that the bomb was go off, which shows some coordination between the group that actually did the bombing and they were watching it. And that's an important and I think significant case, because that was one of the very first and early cases of combining kinetic attacks versus cyber capabilities, which recently we saw a threat intelligence report from AWS talking about it, that, oh, it's a big thing now, Iranians are doing it now. But in fact, it's been a thing for many years by both sides, and Iranians have been also doing it as well. So they probably like just overlooked that case, but that's to say that a lot of things that are popping up in the news as something fresh and new are most often repetition of previous similar examples. And just because it goes way too back or it's lost in the noise, and there has been so many other incidents related to that space, they just get lost and they get forgotten. So hopefully those clusters will make it easy to refine them and talk about them as well.
Yeah, something important in analysis, when we see all these events, sometimes it's quite, it can be quite confusing for analysts to understand the relationship. What we found is by encoding into the knowledge, into the graphs, some very basic things, which is which actor loves which basically type of tools or is related to which organization, and to encode it with a love-hate relationship. We can compute basically clusters of things that kind of like each other, and also oppositions. And we try to encode that in the graph with very obvious green and red kind of color coding, which enabled sometimes to find less trivial relationships. And that's super interesting. Maybe not too much at the geopolitical level because everything is questionable, but sometimes more on the artifacts and incident response kind of forensic missions where you're trying, oh, okay, interesting. This actor is maybe related to this one because they use and kind of like the same IOC or TTPs. So very interesting to see that some kind of analysis beat the concentration on the timeline of event or the concentration of relationship between actors and their tools can enable to extract knowledge from what is happening within operation and within cyber attacks. I'm going to leave on play basically the timeline and basically try to see if there's any event that is really popping up and interesting for us. But what we can see is that there's an acceleration. Basically 2015, 17 to 2026, for me, there was like really a lot more things happening, or we knew about what was happening. So that kind of coincides to the very good podcast you've done with the Grok on basically the knowledge of the ramping up of capabilities. What can we say? Did they change substantially in terms of capabilities, or they just have a bigger engine?
A bit of both, but one, I mentioned earlier here that the government side in Iran kind of suffocated the research community and the hacker space in Iran for many years. They learned after, I think, 5-6 years that this is gonna cost themselves talent and resources and capabilities. So they decided to revert back, make it a little bit more friendly and sugar-coated things, and started to be a little bit more friendly with the community again. And then we started seeing a couple of training centers and entities popping up, like very well-funded, very nicely established and organized groups that, I mean, they are private sector, obviously, and on paper, but in reality, we could like it's a wink-wink situation that we know, like in Iran, you cannot be independently organizing something as simple as a hacker gathering without getting questions. And now suddenly imagine there is a flashy, nicely well-funded entity with a decent building popping up in the middle of the capital that is providing a set of advanced like cybersecurity trainings, like most of them are hacking, red teaming as we as we call it. And then they claim that we are independent, we are not affiliated with the government. Let's not use words that require beeps here, but we know how it works. I mean, it's also like not to just mock it. Like every country does that. Like it's the same practice in the US. It's the same practice in Sweden, in Germany, in France, everywhere. So they are doing what's good for their nation and what's in favor of where their interests lie. So you cannot question them or cannot judge them for doing that. But it's interesting to look from technical side that you mentioned, like, is there advancement in capabilities or not? You in probably in your timeline as well, that there is this flat progress line of basic tooling, basic exploits, basic web shells and stuff. Then you probably see 2-3 of these training classes and like entities start to emerge. And probably with a delay of 1 or 2 years, you would start seeing different clusters of hacking groups from Iran are also implementing more advanced tools. They are getting better at their implants. They are using more advanced techniques. They are using more up-to-date exploits. Like before, they were using like 1 or 2 year old vulnerability exploits. Now they are basically repurposing CVEs and vulnerabilities that were just published last week, and they are already exploiting it in the wild because they have the skill to go from a patch, reverse it, and make an exploit or whatnot. So it shows. And there has been a decent spike, I think, since very recently, actually. I would say 4 years ago, it started that there was a notable jump from basic implants and basic backdoors into more like kernel-level implants, more like advanced techniques used like anti-forensics or making it harder to detect, try to evade EDRs and whatnot. Those techniques are something that was not observed or practiced 10 years ago at all. You wouldn't see anything. The best thing they were doing was base 64 encoding their web shell and hoping that it would not be detected by a local AV. Now you can actually see in some of the modern implants, especially on the MOIS affiliated side, that they try to hook, I don't know, EDR APIs and try to fly below the radar. And those techniques, interestingly, are literally, if you backtrace and you go Google search, and I'm not going to be too much open about it, but if you look at some of these recent samples and techniques that used by these implants, it's literally what's being advertised that is being taught by those training centers. So it's it's a 1 + 1 situation here.
Yeah, definitely we can see the relationship, and sadly that's basically happening everywhere. Now, a surprising thing for me is that if we look at the usage of these capabilities, basically remnant, hard to detect backdoors into critical systems, and we can assume that some of the MOIS operation were successful to be able to compromise some infrastructure. I didn't see so much, except maybe for the Striker wipe, which was well advertised, where basically there was a wiper attack and basically destruction of data of the IT system of medical builder, medical company from the US called Striker. So that was one, I'm sorry, very well known recent development. But I didn't see as much of these things as I was expecting. For example, it's well known that for China, there's attack group APTs such as Salt Typhoon, which are reputed to be with capabilities of having many disruptive capabilities if there was something happening with Taiwan. So that's the current thing, is to prepare and try to find all the backdoors installed by Salt Typhoon before any kind of conflict happen, because then it will dramatically reduce the amount of damage that China does on this infrastructure. So I was kind of expecting more damage, more disruption originating from Iran in this case of conflict. Did I actually miss something? Because I'm not, of course, looking as probably as much as you do, or is it also something surprising?
Shouldn't be really surprising, and that also goes back to the point that I think I mentioned, that it's more like the works that we see from Iranian groups in general is more of an opportunistic work and like high noise, low impact kind of work. So they do have, of course, it's safe to assume that they do have some capabilities and some accesses, of course, but it's not as advanced, as deep as what we can see from Westerns like Langlois 10 years in telecom networks of Iran and still operating and still doing what they want. On the Iranian side, it's not so much of that. There has been attempts, and as you can see in some of these leaked materials from Iranian actor groups like Kitten Buster and Muddy Water, you could see that they were trying to like usually sit on mail servers and whatnot. But I personally don't recall a case of like the proper teleco compromise from the Iranian side, mostly because I think they lack the technical capabilities, both on the implant side and on the exploitation side. And you probably should know better that like it's not like, if you want to go look around in a telecom network, it's not like a typical web server or a database server that you would connect and run queries against one or two systems and call it a day and gather your intelligence and come out. It takes like skills to how the network operates and where to persist, what to watch, how to even process, like, I don't know, raw traffic, what to look for. Like you need to have some decent engineering skill as a teleco engineer to be able to actually pull off some of those advanced operations that we're watching in the world, targeting like what Salt Typhoon is doing, or some other, I think they're not fully open. Like I've seen some TLP Red stuff that there are some actors that are targeting Middle East telecom networks as well, that like the tooling itself tells how advanced the skill sets and how familiar those groups are with teleco networking structures in general, not just that specific target. Like you need to know how SIGTRAN works, and you need to know how you can actually use SIGTRAN as a C2 channel to jump from teleco A in country A to teleco B into another country or continent. So that tells there's a lot of skills where these tools coming from, and we're just seeing tip of the iceberg. I have not seen nor heard any similar level of attack and work from the Iranian side. Like closest to this have been like some of the Handala group, for example, that they claim that they have hacked the MDM solutions used by the IDF, which I verified personally and looked into it, found exactly what they exploited. I don't know why nobody covers that as well, but that turned out to be a false claim as well. Like the IDF is not even using that company or that system that they claimed or that they actually hacked and dumped data from. It's not even used by IDF. It's a private sector. Like I don't want to get into the details of it, but that turned out to be a false claim as well. But that was as close as teleco or like phone level hacking. It's still a decent capability. We should not be ignoring it, but it's not on par or even remotely similar to what Chinese or Russians or Westerns are already deploying against each other and using it. And they use it against Iran as well. And interestingly, there has been a very few random isolated cases where one or two Iranian cybersecurity entities reported on capturing advanced implants in Iran. One specific was targeting ILO servers. There was a rootkit case that was discovered, but even that one, you see that I'm not sure. This is just me thinking out loud and expressing my personal view. But I think the only reason that was discovered was that not that because that company was detecting this kind of rootkits and implants on hardware. It was because they observed a weird anomaly, which was this implant failing to update the background image of login page. And then again, they didn't do the hard work of dumping and exploit, because you actually need to exploit the ILO firmware to be able to do the forensics works that they did. So my assumption is, I could be very much wrong and not giving them the credit that they deserve, the team that they developed this. But as far as I can tell, it's most likely a case of, again, outsourcing your CTI and DFIR work to an Eastern European contractor or company, and then publishing the result under your own logo and brand. Nevertheless, that's again an outdated capability that Iran has observed and captured and still holds a sample. There is no public sample of that rootkit anywhere. But it's if we look at the past, that how they received, repurposed, and reused what was used against them, we know that Iranians have been targeted of these ILO rootkits and exploits and these kind of like data center level like operations. We have seen it a couple of times. We saw it during like some oil industry networks being compromised this way. We saw it very recently in some attacks against the fuel system. We saw it more recently during Iran-Israel war against Sepah Bank, that similarly some Dell storage solutions were exploited and compromised. So Iran has received all of those malwares and exploits, and someone somewhere holds those samples and have reversed it for sure. But we have not seen a single one of those samples and details being published. It doesn't mean they don't have it. It just means that Iran is probably repurposing them and holding or reusing it against somewhere else in another attack, which we have not seen it surface yet. So I would be surprised if one of these APT groups affiliated to Iran in a couple of years or sooner than later do something that resembles those hacks that they were a subject of, and more specifically on the like embedded side in remote management solutions and IPMI solutions that are used at data centers. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that happening and being repurposed. And the one last thing to quickly add is that it's a common practice and common pattern that we see that whatever goes to Iran and gets caught, you don't see any detailed technical report or even samples released by the Iranians officials. They have a general policy of like slipping it under the rug, and the reason for that part of it is because they don't want to damage. The other is that they want to learn and repurpose and reuse it. So whatever you see they discover, even though they don't publish any technical details for different reasons, that's a whole long discussion itself. Part of it, I believe, is because they take the samples, they give it to their operations, like hacking groups, to study, reverse, and repurpose. So it's a closed pipeline between the companies that do DFIR in Iran versus the teams that do offensive operations in Iran. So they are interconnected, maybe not directly like MOIS or IRGC mediates between them, but it's I believe it's a common thing to assume that once one of those incidents happen and Iran says that, oh, we caught like APT Chinese APTs in our telecom network, it's safe to assume that they have provided those samples to some of their hacking units as well to study and see what they can make out of it.
Okay, definitely an interesting reuse pattern, which is a kind of institutionalized. Do we see, there was a question in the chat, which is interesting from Roman. Actually, it's a two-step. Did we see some example where actually they were quite having a novel approach, maybe not technical, but in their usage of these attack tools that they repurposed, for example? And do we see also something that must be difficult, but the use of AI, which now basically developing is massively successful with AI and LLM, and Gen AI. So it must be, yeah, quite a challenge. But do we see some uptick in the activity?
Short answer, yes. But I'm just going to read the other case, the tool repurposing. I'm just going to read that question, make sure I got it.
Yeah, to give the context, definitely uncensored AI models is a huge enabler for attackers who don't really know some details.
I mean, so there has been a couple of cases, not even new, like if we can go back 10 years already, that Iranians, let's put it this way, because they lack some advanced capabilities on par with Western like operators, that they go like, I don't know, super sophisticated malwares, rootkits and whatnot. They don't have that skill. They don't have like skills to develop full chain iOS zero click remotes and whatnot. So they have to and be creative with the skill level and capabilities that they have, which is not advanced, but they can look at new or novel attack vectors that matches with their skill level. And what does that mean? It means that they look at hacking and repurposing things or services that was not thought through before or is not well guarded and protected before, because nobody has abused that system or that platform before. And case point of that is the DigiNotar hack or those similar like cases against like hacking CAs and certificate providers. I'm sure there were like isolated cases of CAs being compromised, but when we talk about CAs, everyone assumes a super well guarded, super secure HSM system that's sitting somewhere, that's publishing and generating private keys for google.com certificate and yahoo.com certificate. But in reality, when you look at the supply chain and the structure of sellers and resellers and service providers that operate in that domain and in that sector of the market, you would actually see that you don't need some NSA level cryptographic capabilities to break.
Oh, we had
for Skype.com. You can go as far with as something as simple as a SQL injection on a reseller portal of, I don't know, a Turkish reseller of a Dutch CA service provider, get to the pipeline and work your way, learn how it works. And that was like a novel work in the sense that no one has thought, not because it's not possible, because no one thought, oh, there is the easy way to do this as well, which Iranians showed that you can do that. So there are cases like that they demonstrated that with technical capabilities that they have, it is still possible to do remarkable and interesting works and very impactful works as well. You don't need any super complex rootkit. You don't need ODAs or whatnot. You could get as far with basic. I mean, basic is of course like simplifying it, but you don't need super advanced capabilities to pull off the attacks that they did. And similarly, similar to the DigiNotar case and attacks on CA certificates, which started the whole domino effect of browsers being more careful, and then we started seeing this certificate transparency move that became more like, I think it was already in place, but people got better awareness about it. Oh, this is a way to do it as well. So let's watch these logs too. Then moving forward, a couple of years ago, we started seeing interesting, or I mean, I wouldn't say novel, but not at this scale, attacks against DNS providers, for example, that was used to target some American and European entities because I think they compromised the Swedish ISP and DNS provider. It was something like that. I don't remember the case, but the keyword and the important aspect of it was an interesting way of abusing a DNS service provider to launch your attacks. I'm sure there are more cases if I think hard enough, but these are the ones on top of my head. And about the AI, interestingly, I think I talked about it 3 years ago, probably, or 4 years ago, openly as well. Back then, like ChatGPT was still not cool. That was not the cool kid in the hacking scene. People were still realizing that it is useful for this purpose. Models were not as advanced, as capable as they are right now, but there are already, or there were already signs that Iranians have started investing on that domain as well. But it has not been operationalized because of the model's capabilities were not actually practically reliable. So the tool chain of using an LLM to run a pen test already existed on the Iranian side, I would say 3-4 years ago. The only reason we haven't seen it probably at scale, or maybe we have seen, we just didn't know it's AI, is that A, they are not relying on commercial model providers for obvious operational security reasons. B, because they're like they're running like locally hosted, self-hosted models, as far as I know, and it's harder to detect that pattern remotely if they are not relying on, I don't know, cloud or codecs or whatnot. But it has been in place, and there has been pipelines in existence that would benefit from an LLM to do port scan, do basic web checks and stuff. And the concept of like running agents to do a web scan, or running like using LLM to run an agent to do some interaction with network systems and services was already in place. That is for sure. But I'm not sure why or how I missed that, but I'm pretty sure they are already using those capabilities as well. So is everyone else. It would be weird and stupid to not use it if you're working on that level. So I would say it's safe to assume that some of the stuff that we are observing, especially you see suddenly a spike of new attacks against targets in the region or against random targets in the West. Part of it could be, again, I have no technical like IOC to provide to back that claim up, but I assume, and it's an educated guess based on what I know for fact, that part of what we are seeing and the spike could be contributed to using those capabilities as well.
Okay.
And as models get more like open source models get more capable, especially in the agenting work, like DeepSeek, for example, or I think the French model is the frontier as well in the open among open source models. Sooner or later, we would see that like popping up and becoming more active and more actively used from the Iranian actors as well. Not because they are just learning how to use it, but because they have an existing pipeline that was not operationalized because they didn't have a good model. Now they seem to be getting those good models for free, and they just need the infrastructure to run it. And one might assume that, okay, but Iran doesn't have access to advanced GPUs and hardwares and whatnot. That's also a naive assumption, because they have always had actually access to latest hardware, latest brands and models of whatever they need. So you could easily find latest GPUs and even data center level hardware in Iran. They just use their proxies of bypassing sanctions and buying them and importing them into the country. So never assume that because it's a sanctioned thing, Iran or China will not be able to get their hands on. In fact, they have been solid and super strong in that game of gaining access to latest ASICs and GPUs, not for security, but for their cryptocurrency mining operations, which IRGC is massively operating and benefiting from that. Like they have clusters and data centers for mining, which either like thousands of nodes running like FPGAs to mine stuff, and this is their part of the source of their revenue. That's also something that only recently people have realized, and they're talking about that Iran has been a big player in that sector, and part of it we are only observing because some of those infrastructures lost access or were shut down during the war or because of the war. So you see, oh, there's suddenly a drop of the spike. That's so it was Iranians. So yeah, back to the AI thing. Yeah, back to the AI thing. Pipeline already existed for a couple of years. Now that models are getting good, I think sooner or later they would just plug it to the engine, like plug the new engine to the existing vehicle, and have a hell of a ride with it as well.
Yeah. So it's very interesting to see this multi-point or multi-plateau kind of profile of Iran capabilities, and also Iran on the receiving end. Based on this, the difficult question: what can we say about the probable activity and future in this context of active war right now? Of course, right now the premium is definitely around the kinetic operations, who is bombing who is sending missiles, and the Shahed and all these things. But is there some kind of risky prediction or possible or probable outlook that we can say in this conflict? And that's actually related to the question that Roman asked on the cases of other countries helping Iran in cyber offense. For example, we've seen, for example, that Iran helped Russia with the Shahed in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, providing, as far as I know, not only finished products, but also assembly lines. They enable the Russian to build their own Shahed, if I'm not mistaken.
Basically, transfer the technology of Shahed development there, pipeline and software and everything.
So this doesn't happen by chance. There's always a return favor. So is there something we can see in this, maybe not only relating to the Iran war, but in this basically day-to-day conflict and heated worldwide environment we need now to work and defend in? Is there something we can maybe conclude and say our position based on this knowledge?
So I'm going to go backward to answer your question about other nations helping Iranians in terms of cyber capabilities. Yes and no, because the way, like, there has been a relationship going on for many years, especially with the Russian counterparts. And it usually works in forms of trainings and providing access to knowledge rather than pure tooling and like selling ODAs and whatnot. It's not the same way as we can observe or assume that, like, Five Eyes, for example, share their offensive capabilities with each other, UK and US, like helping each other, providing like cyber capabilities. It's not, as far as I know, which I could be wrong and misinformed, but as far as I know, it's not exactly like that. The Russians would give a package of ODAs to Iranians just because two intelligence agencies talk to each other. It works more like Iranians sending their operators to Russian events and Russian companies and trainings and whatnot to acquire the knowledge and come back home and develop their own thing. And they're like, it's a typical destination for government affiliated Iranian hackers to show up in Russian like security events, for example, like Zero Nights. Is it, what's the
Zero Nights in St. Petersburg?
Yeah. That's a typical one, for example. And then beside that, there is also Russian companies or Eastern European companies, mostly Russian, that have started since a couple of years ago to actually provide and sell their capabilities to Iranian customers. And by customers, we obviously mean the government customers. And part of that, this is again not something exactly open and well discussed or public, but the fact that, like, one of the sanctioned Russian entities that provides offensive capabilities, they are known to have provided or offered at least their capabilities to the Iranian side, so they could have acquired some ODAs that this company sells. Now, as far as I know, the type of ODAs or the type of vulnerabilities that are provided in these packages are not something like super advanced stuff. It's like basic stuff that not high level or super valuable vulnerabilities. Nevertheless, ODAs and useful one way or another, but it's not like a zero-day exploit against Windows that works across all the versions, or a zero-day exploit against latest, for example, Cisco VPN. So it's not like that. More like the application vulnerabilities, routers and modems on the consumer side and whatnot, things like that. So that relationship has been already in place. It probably gets more during the wartime as well. And as I think I was reading recently, 2-3 days ago, that Russia is actually providing intelligence to the Iranian side, and that includes, I'm not sure is what's China or Russia, that they provide like satellite imagery access as well to the Iranian. So that relationship related to the war specifically is already in place. How much of it is related to cyber, hard to tell, obviously. But one interesting note again to put a pin on is that so far as I'm counting, 4 of notable entities or people that are heavily involved with IRGC or MOIS hacking operations and some of these groups that we see, they have been target of missile strikes to their buildings that they're operating from. Like yesterday was the last one for an IRGC affiliated group. 2 more happened, I think, during the early days of the war, including one that I wrote on Twitter about as well, which was funny because this building is known to be an operation base of an IRGC affiliated group. I don't remember exactly the name of the individuals, but nevertheless, it receives the missile and the building is turned into rubles. But what's interesting is the way the news for that one broke is that a random guy, and like it's a video posted on Twitter, and a random guy is filming the site like probably moments after the explosion. You can still see like bodies and like smoke and everything in the scene. The guy goes and looks around, and in his hand, he doesn't pick it up from the floor. In his hand are some papers that he shows to the camera, which is his phone recording. One is a promotion level for like good work, and that is translated into promotion like paid off days or something like that. The name of the entity is one of the among these FBI wanted and sanctioned entities that are known to be affiliated with Iran. That's a little bit dusty paper, but the other paper, the second one that the guy pulls up, is super interesting because it's a pristine, clean, printed sheet of paper with the name of the guy that's known as the head of that hacking unit that's supposed to be operating from that building. So the camera basically shows that this guy, and it's obviously printed and prepared in advance, and this guy could be like an in-field agent of Israeli side that's just there to confirm the hit, and it's just showing it to the camera and then releasing the video that this could be you if you continue hacking Israeli entities, and if you're working with IRGC as a hacker. It was basically a clear message, and what makes me sure to say that is that like you can't randomly like through like 4-story building pile of rubles you find exactly the name of the person that's in charge of all of this and that entity, and the paper is in pristine, clean, not even folded form. You hold it in front of the camera, and the guy is also holding a cigarette in his hand. It's like some gangster movie shit. It was an interesting message. So back to the subject that, like that, 2 other buildings were bombed or received missiles as well, and 2 individuals as well. One was like a high-rank MOIS officer that was killed in a strike against MOIS headquarters itself. And the other one was an individual leading one of the teams in a city outside of Tehran that was I think in his personal residential building that was tracked and attacked as well. Those will certainly have some effect and impact on the stream of things that we are observing, because a couple of people and a group of individuals that are operating are literally wiped. And also similar to that, we have also seen recently this kitten buster case. That's a very typical continuation effort and work of unmasking Iranian hacking groups and the individual people and operations behind them. So that also supposed to create some deterrence as well. Whether it's effective or not, that's a whole different subject and not so much too short. But the parallel event to the war is that we are seeing a lot of opportunistic and random targets being popped by Handala or similar groups that shows that they are hot and engaging actively with the targets, but they are not necessarily impactful targets. They make it like striker case, for example. It's a noisy case, and it's of course causing a lot of damage, but it's not something of strategic value. They are targeted because they are an American or Israeli company that happen to be a low-hanging fruit. You wouldn't see, like, I think a couple of days ago, I also see claims from this APT Iran group, which is like mostly posting bullshit only. They claim that they have hacked Lockheed Martin and dumped 300 terabytes of data or some like nonsense claim like that. You can only laugh at it, but it shows that the prepositioning that the Israelis or Americans have been doing for years in Iran is not exactly happening, or has not happened by the Iranian side, because if they would have done it, now would have been the time to pull the trigger. Like they attacked the Iranian like oil enrichment facilities and whatnot. If Iran could have pulled another Aramco attack, now would have been the perfect time to do it. For example, if they had capability to cripple some military related activities or communications in Israel or for the US, now would have been the time. What we are not seeing it happening, and it goes along the same lines of their like missile capabilities. That I mean, part of it is like Iranians are actually like doing what they can with their attacks and missile strikes from Iran, but most often we have been hearing a lot of bold claims that were promised to be happening if a war breaks between Iran and Israel or in the US. We will do such and such, and right now is the time for delivering those promises, and we rarely are seeing any of them materializing as actual like in-field operations or attacks. So same applies to their cyber capabilities as well, that they made a lot of bold claims before. Had they actually had this capability, now would have been the time to see it, but we are not. Instead, we are watching a gap. And part of it is because it simply doesn't exist. The other part is that because of the, I would say, not necessarily related, but it has an effect that Iranian internet access right now is in a flaky situation. But that's for average people, like those affiliated with the government and these kind of actors and groups. They obviously are exempt from these restrictions. So it's also not correct to say that because internet access in Iran is shut down, these hacking groups are also blinded out and they are locked out of it. They do what they want to. They most often have unlimited access to internet, so it shouldn't really impact them. But if we are not seeing this, is because most likely they didn't have any preparation in advance to use it right now. Whatever we are seeing is opportunistic, ongoing effort that's producing result, and then they are publishing as Handala or whatever proxy groups that they are using for hacking.
Yeah, and on the other side, we do see basically that the US and Israel are using cyber capabilities. So you talked about the webcam. There was also quite some rumors about the decapitation strikes that happened on top leading. First wave of existing commanders, then second wave of replacement commanders. Maybe we are third or fourth wave right now. So there has been usage of cyber capabilities there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's good for eliminating Khamenei. That case alone, I think I specifically mentioned that in like in a podcast and Through Body Problems over a year ago. I think it was that like that very network was openly advertised to be compromised by a group called Qiyam Sarnaguni, which on paper they claim to be affiliated with MEK, Mujahideen Khalq, which is like opposition group against the Iranian government. But in reality, MEK doesn't have any cyber capabilities. It's a front face for an operation, Western backed operation to target and leak Iranian sensitive data and networks. And they claimed, and they actually published information, which I could verify myself because I knew that network, they published a list of CCTV cameras and all the details about it that shows that they literally had access to live feeds of all CCTV cameras in Tehran and likely the entire country. And 2 years, we talked a lot about it, and I also tweeted about that case, that imagine what kind of access that they have, and they're confident that they can maintain it, that they are burning openly by dumping these like Excel sheets of camera details. So for sure, they would have maintained some sort of access in the same network. And right now, 2 years later, 3 years later, we are seeing them talking about the same capability, exact same capability, being used to track Khamenei's compound and like use it as part of the operation that target them. So yeah, they're heavily actually relying and using on cyber capabilities in this war as well. And I actually maintain a thread on X as well that the stuff that are exactly related to cyber and related to the ongoing war, I also keep adding new stuff as things emerge and break the news. I add them to the same thread. So if anyone is interested, they can follow that thread and see all cyber-related activities related to the Iran, Israel, and US war there.
Awesome. Excellent. I think we were already in the conclusions side of this presentation, and definitely in terms of resources, we'll be basically updating data and putting the links that we talked about. We'll be also opening ApexThreats so that everyone who was on this webinar can actually access and discover the data set, etc. Definitely reaching it a bit, but at the same time, the value of all these things is to provide a point of view and not exhaustivity, meaning that if you go exhaustive with all the IOCs, the groups, etc., it becomes really too much. So for me, this was really, we've done Q&A already. I don't know if there's some last minute question or things you wanted to conclude with, Hamid.
I think we covered most of what we wanted to cover, and I appreciate it, and thank you for having me. It's always interesting to talk about stuff related to Iran, especially on the side that goes to Iran, because that's typically less covered and more interesting side, actually, because you're seeing novel attacks and interesting works that are considered friendly fire. So you typically don't see or hear about how those stuff were happened, like Novitex attack and attack on Sepah Bank that was happening during the previous 12 days war between Iran and Israel. That's a whole interesting case study on its own, which at some point myself or someone else might publish details about it. But for now, it's as TLP red, as this community likes to call it. But nevertheless, there are a lot of interesting stuff happening on both sides, but we are just seeing maybe 10%, 5% of it publicly and openly, and that tells that I'm not sure what it tells, to be honest. But there is a lot. There is a lot going on, much more going on than what we see in the news and what we hear. You just need to tune into the right channels and observe right places and talk to the right people to get a full grasp and understanding of the scale of this cyber war side of this thing. It's much more than what we see in some of those random articles online.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also always a good reflex of being humble on the knowledge that we have. We have basically artifacts, we have symptoms. We try to do attribution, but basically never ever it's easy and 100% conclusive.
Right.
So, and this is the fog of war here, literally, that there is an ongoing war. But generally in cybersecurity, this is the fog of war under which we always operate, which is difficult, which is always to treat things with caution, because you never know if there's first basically a mistake, but you never know if there's not a plan in a plan, that basically something is supposed to happen this way to trigger something else. We definitely need to revisit maybe that in 1 year, maybe definitely. And I wanted to thank you a lot for this vision and perspective on all these questions related to Iran. We're definitely top experts. You're definitely a top expert in this question, and always a pleasure to talk with you, Hamid.
Thank you very much. Pleasure is mine.
Hamid, thank you, Philippe. Thank you all for your time. Contact us if you have unique perspective on very important topics. Again, massive thank you to all of you. We've been over time a little bit, but for the right reason, I'm sure. Thank you again, and have a good day.
Have a good
Bye,
day.
everyone.
We'll see you live.